All right, we're about to start in 1 minute. All right, it is 9 o'clock, and I believe in starting on time. So I want to say welcome to the first online Sabbath School teachers meeting, where I'm going to, over the course of this quarter at least, try to help you, if you're a Sabbath School teacher, in dealing with this quarter's lesson. Before I talk about this lesson, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. For those of you I have not met, my name is Curtis Hall. I reside in the greater Atlanta area, outside of Atlanta. I've been in the Sabbath School ministry for training teachers and superintendents for almost 10 years now. And my website is sabbathschoolcoaching.com. Many of you have a copy of my book. I always say I'm an international author because someone in Canada ordered a copy of my book, so I'm now international. But really, I've been blessed to be able to travel all over the world talking about Sabbath School, the importance of Sabbath School, and how to do it better. Currently, I am a Sabbath School superintendent at a small church called the Alpharetta Seventh-day Adventist Church, wonderful church community, where I was just asked to be the superintendent over the last month or so. Prior to that, I served for 9 years as the general Sabbath School superintendent at the Atlanta Berean Seventh-day Adventist Church, very large church inside Atlanta. So I have a little background in Sabbath School. I've been a Sabbath School teacher for over 30 years. I've taught all sizes of classes from 1 to thousands, and I remember the 1 as much as I remember the thousands. And I want to share over the course of this quarter some principles that I know can help you to be more effective as a Sabbath School teacher. That's my purpose. That's why I'm doing this, because I know there are a lot of teachers that want to do better. They're just not quite sure how to do it. So from every Thursday p.m. at 9 o'clock, we'll look at the week's lesson and we'll discuss, if you like to, ask some questions about issues you're having with your class. As we talk about the lesson, I'll also share some strategies on how your class can be more effective. And I think before we even talk about this quarter's lesson, which is a remarkable lesson, if you are a Sabbath School teacher, you can't find a better lesson. This is like the sweet spot of the gospel to have this quarter to talk about, especially in the days that we're living in. We're going to talk about the lesson in just a few minutes. I want to talk about first your role as a Sabbath School teacher. If you are leading a Sabbath School class, I wrote down a few notes, and one of our purposes as teachers is to make is to have meaningful group Bible studies. That's really what it boils down to as an adult class teacher. A meaningful group Bible study. And notice I'm very careful about that. I didn't say a meaningful lecture where you do all the talking to your class and they just supposedly absorb it, or a little sermon where you just preach with fire and consider that Sabbath school. I don't think that's meaningful. What makes a Sabbath school meaningful, number one, is that I encourage teachers to shift away from seeing Sabbath school as a history class, where every week we get together and we go over church history. Um, there might have been a day in the past where that would draw people out, the charge of prophecy or whatever, but we're in a different age. And for your class to be meaningful, it has to be relevant to the needs of the people in your class. It just can't be a history lesson. Our classes have to be inspiring and encouraging. Whenever I do a workshop at a church, this is one of the things that I really harp on, that we have to find a way in our classes, and this lesson is this quarter is a perfect method to doing that. We have to find a way in our classes to inspire our members to reach higher in their Christian experience, challenging all of us to grow as Christians. The Sabbath school is a part of discipleship. Not only do we want to inspire them to reach higher in their Christian experience, to grow, we also want to encourage them on how to deal with everyday life, so that when someone leaves our class, they are challenged to grow and better equipped to deal with everyday life. If we could do that, people will come back to our class. Another thing that makes your class meaningful is participation. That is a challenge, I know, for a lot of teachers, and I'm going to help you to have more participation in your classes. Um, uh, the worst sound for a Sabbath school teacher, or anyone who's supposed to be doing something that has participation, is the sound of crickets. It terrifies us as teachers for silence, and sometimes we're not sure how to deal with that silence, so we start talking again. I want to give you some tools on how to deal with that, how to get participation. And the secret is, which is really not a secret, especially if you read my book or sat through any of my classes, the secret to having good participation is a simple one. It's quality questions. Not stump the class questions, not questions that are so hard that it makes you look like you're a deep scholar and you have all the answers. You have to craft your questions in a way that generate participation. And don't worry, I'm going to help you do that. And for those of you who have the book, you'll be familiar with some of these principles I want to talk about. I'm a big stickler on that. So let's talk about this week's lesson. We are in the second week of this quarter, and the title for all 3 months, July through September, is The Least of These. It's a great lesson, that you will find ways to talk about issues that are happening right now. And I just want to put a pin right there. As you, as a teacher, are leading out in your class, from week to week, especially on a topic like this, I want to just kind of put this in your mind right now. Move away from what everyone else should be doing and make it more inclusive to what we should be doing. I find that many times teachers will talk down and condescend to the people in their classes when we're all in this together. We're all dealing with challenges in our lives, and we all have, as I mentioned, ways to grow. So let's talk about how to have a good Sabbath school class. This principle applies to every week of your class. This is the question you should be your number one question. How does this week's lesson benefit the people in my class? That's your number one question. Everything you do throughout the week should filter through that question. How does this week's lesson benefit the people in my class? It can't be just a history lesson. This week we cover several topics we'll go over in just a few minutes. But the bottom line is, as a teacher, when I'm putting together my outline, and I'm going to talk more about outlines as a teacher, about what your outline should be. I'm just going to give you a little peek at the outline for the last class I taught, and I'll go over this in more detail, as time goes on. But it's my outline. It's how I'm going to start, it's how I'm going to transition, it's how I'm going to end. It contains the stories I'm going to tell. And one of the reasons why I stress outline, and you're just going to have to hang with me on this one. What I'm about to say is something that I say at all of my workshops. We deal with it in detail, but I just want to be open with you that I am a stickler about this. If you are a Sabbath school teacher, I am convinced without any doubt, and I have the evidence to back it up, that we should lead our Sabbath school classes with our Bibles only. We should talk about the week's lesson. I'm not saying going off on a tangent, but when you come into your class, it should be a Bible-based class. And I get a lot of pushback from that on a lot of teachers because they feel like they have to read Sunday's lesson, Monday's lessons, Tuesday's lesson to their class. And I'm going to be quite honest. The only people that will generally sit through that are old people. And I'm on that side of old. You see the gray. But personally, I won't come out to a Sabbath school class if you're just going to read the lesson to me. I read it at home. I'm not going to come out at 9:15, 9:30, whatever time your Sabbath school starts for you to reread the lesson to me. So I'm challenging you as a teacher, if that is not your method, to be open to trying a new way of leading your class, that is being Bible-based. And I'll walk you through all of that. I'm not just going to tell you something. The reason I say I have the evidence, I mentioned earlier that I've been teaching Sabbath school for over 30 years. I don't even want to number it past 30 years. And I have my custom over the last few years when I'm invited to different churches, regardless of the size of church, that I do the Sabbath school lesson during the 11 o'clock service. In place of the sermon, after all the other things happen that are normally happen, I do the lesson. And it is critical that if I'm doing a lesson at 11 o'clock, it has to be engaging. I just can't get up there and drone on and tell the church who hasn't even looked at the lesson, let's read Monday's lesson. It has to be interactive with participation, and because I know there's visitors there, there's people who haven't read their Bibles or whatever. So I know these principles work. So I'm just trying to implore you to trust me on this if that's an issue for you, that you can do it, okay? This week's lesson is, I want to give you some pointers for this week's lesson, and let's see here. Let me make sure I don't miss any comments. Okay, if you have any comments or if there's anything that you need a little bit more explanation on, feel free to share. This will be a short class. I don't want it to go any more than 30 minutes because I want you to come back next Thursday. And remember, you were here on the first night. You are part of history. This week's lesson is Blueprint for a Better World. And it covers a lot of information that's very, very good. But you have to find a way to, as I said, the question you have to ask yourself is, how will this benefit my class on Sabbath when I'm teaching my class? And I want to give you some suggestions. It's Thursday. Many of you have already been looking at your lesson all week. and you have a general idea of how you want to go. But for someone, I want you to just kind of consider some of these things. What is the takeaway at the end of this coming Sabbath class, when your people leave the class? What is it that you want them to have taken away from that class beyond church biblical history, beyond information? And information is vital. We need more information. We need knowledge. But beyond that, what do you want them to take away from this week's lesson? So I'm going to give you some suggestions. If you are still putting together your outline, less is better. Don't try to make a bunch of points. Focus on 2 or 3 at the most solid points that you want to make as you discuss the week's lesson. Don't feel like you have to cover everything that was in this quarter, in this week's lesson. As a Sabbath school teacher, before I teach the lesson on Sabbath, I read the entire lesson, all the helps and things like that, so I can understand what the general theme of the lesson is. And from that theme, I focused what direction I want to take the class. Okay, so let me give you a few suggestions that may help you. One of the themes is on, let's use this one here. It was on Sunday's lesson, and it's titled "The God Who Hears," and it uses this wonderful text from Exodus 3, verse 7. It says, "I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering." What I'm about to do now is I'm going to give you a formula to generate a discussion off of that text. I told you earlier that one of the worst things we want to hear is crickets, is silence. You want a class that has their hands in the air. My goal as a Sabbath school teacher is that I envision my class as a giant jet that I need to get off the ground. I need hands in the air. I need people raising their hands. And I'm going to share all of my secrets, my best kept secrets of how to do that. I want to share those with you. But here's what I want you to do, just as an example. On Sabbath, if you're discussing this particular verse, when you have a volunteer read that verse, notice I said volunteer. Many people will never raise their hands to comment or question, but so I always ask, can someone please read whatever the text is? Can someone please read whatever the text is? I want a volunteer to read the text so they will feel involved in the discussion. So they'll read. I'll say, all right, can I get a volunteer to read Exodus, and what I say, Exodus chapter 3. So I'll wait for them to turn there. And when they read Exodus chapter 3, verse 7, I'm going to read it again. Let's just going to act like this is what's happening. Remember, my goal is participation, and in the back of my mind, how does this benefit the people in my class beyond just an academic discussion? So someone reads Exodus 3, verse 7, and they'll say, "And the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people which are in Egypt, and have heard their cry by reason of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrows." The very next thing I'm going to do after they read that is not tell them about something related to that verse. I'm going to ask a question. My question, my very first question will be, can someone share with me what that verse means to them? That's my first question. And I'm going to shut up. I'm not going to give the answer. I'm not going to tell them what the verse means. I need participation. I need people's wheels, the aha moment to start generating. So I'll ask them, what does this verse say to us or teach us or show us, however you want to frame it, but it's the basis of my question. What does this verse about God looking over, seeing, hearing their cries? And someone's going to say, well, I think it means this. And I'll say, oh, that's great. Tell me more about what you mean. I'm getting that dialogue going. I've already studied this verse in depth. I've read all the helps on it. I'm pretty familiar with it, but I want to draw from them. I want to help them on the discovery process. So someone will say, well, I think it means this, that God hears pain or hears cries or he notices people that are abused, whatever it is, just ask different people. Okay, even if you get a great answer the first time, after we talk about that answer that someone's given, I will then ask, does anybody else want to share what they think this verse means? Very simple process. And just wait. Give them a second. And let them give some answers. If they give an answer, I might say, well, can you explain a little bit more detail? Because I'm dialoguing back and forth with the people in my class. And then what I'll probably do is and someone will say, well, God, he sees our pain. Something like that. He sees our pain. So then I might say, well, there's a story in the Bible about Jesus when he interacted and that he noticed someone in pain. And I'll say, can I get a volunteer? I have this great story that I found. Can I get a volunteer to read John 5, verses 5 through 8? And this is a great story about Jesus in John chapter 5. Can I get a volunteer to read? And I'll just wait. It might be a painful 3-5 seconds. Someone's going to say, I'll read it for you. Just hang in there. You need participation. When they read John, and that's a great verse. Let me just read this right here. The reason I picked this verse, John 5, is to illustrate one more truth that I feel is very important as a Sabbath school teacher. John 5, and this is the story about the man who was at the pool and, the troubling of the pool of Bethesda, the troubling of the water, and verse 5 through 8. So I'm going to have someone read what I'm about to read to you. And it says that a certain man was there which had an infirmity 38 years. When Jesus saw him lie and knew he had been there now a long time, he said unto him, wilt thou be made whole? I might stop right there and I might ask a question. Class, why do you think Jesus asked that question? I getting the wheels to turn. I'm not going to tell them why. Someone say, well, I think he was testing his faith or whatever the reason is. I'll say, oh, that's good. That's good. Okay, I'll get a few answers and I'll say, all right, whoever my volunteer was, can you continue to read? And they'll tell the story of verse 7. I have no one to help me get in the pool. Verse 8 says, Jesus says, rise up, take up thy bed and walk. I'm going to do what I did with the first verses from Exodus. Rather than me say, isn't God good about how he comes through for us and how he told this man, I'm going to ask my class, what does these verses teach us about Jesus' concern for us? And someone's going to say, even no matter how long we've been in something, maybe whatever the reasons are, someone's going to give a reason of how they understand this verse. That's what I want to happen. I, as a Sabbath school teacher, do not want to give the answers all the time. I want to draw the answers out of the people in my class. The good thing about this method is that I assume, without any negative connotations, I assume that no one has studied the lesson all week. It's just my assumption. I'm not making any judgments. But it just helps me to prepare that my participation does not rely on if the class is prepared. The participation relies on if I prepare during the week. And I say in my book, and I practice what I preach, that for every 10 minutes of lesson study time, as a Sabbath school teacher, you should be devoting at least 1 hour in preparing. There's no way around it. You can't come in on Friday night, say, honey, where's the quarterly at? Oh, I think it's on the nightstand. And you find the quarterly and get a highlighter and start highlighting thunderous words. That's not going to work. No one's coming out for that but us old people. I need to find a way that anyone, a visitor off the street, can walk in, and when we read the text and they don't have a Bible and my class member is sharing the Bible with the person, the visitor can answer that question as well. This is what I think it means. because I am taking them on a journey. I told you the question is, how does this week's lesson benefit my class? I am taking them there. Now, the reason I said I wanted to use this example is that I believe as Sabbath school teachers, our job is to sell Jesus. So I believe it is. Maybe there's a better way to say it. It doesn't sound as commercial, but our job is to elevate Christ, not ourselves. That's our job. So you should never teach a lesson, I don't care what the subject is, where you don't weave in somehow Jesus Christ. I just believe that. And I know it is powerful to read this story and then to have us as a class show that God, his interaction with us in everyday ways. Your job as a Sabbath school teacher is every week to, after your class, critique yourself. How could I have done that better? What should I have said? What story should I have told that I could have sold Jesus better? Okay, we're running short on time, so let's do one more example. Let's do one more example before I let you go. Hello, Christina. Christine, I'm sorry I wasn't looking at all the comments. As I grow, I'm going to draft my wife to read the comments for me. Remember, you were here on the first day. Let's use one more example. And by the way, Darian, I'm going to post this video on my Sabbath School coaching page so people can see it as a replay. So feel free to share it. Let's use one more example. One of the topics in the lesson is, and we'll get out of here on time, is another page. It was slaves, widows, fatherless, and foreigners. And this is, man, this is like, snatched from the headlines. And it is Exodus 23:9. I'm going to quickly turn there to make sure I quote it right. Exodus 23:9. Exodus 23:9. And again, so let's say I told you, only find 2 or 3 points. Don't try to cover everything. I'll ask, can I get a volunteer to read Exodus 23:9? I'm going to wait. I'm not going to read it. I'm going to ask for a volunteer. Someone's going to read, also thou shalt not oppress a stranger, for ye know the heart of a stranger, seeing ye were strangers in the land of Egypt. After they read that text, I am not going to tell them what it means. My next question is, class, what do these verses teach us? What do these verses show us? Someone's going to say, well, I think it means so-and-so. Someone's going to say, I think it means so-and-so. That's what you want to do. When they say, I think it means so-and-so, can you tell me a little bit more, John, why do you say that? I'm getting that discussion. I know what the verse means because I prepared. I put in that hour for every 10 minutes. But I need them to go along on this discovery journey. So when they say, I think it means this, we exhaust it. Does anybody else want to share? I'm after participation. Someone share. And then I'll say, there's another example that I found. And what is this really teaching us? And some will probably say, maybe humility. Remember where you came from. That's a good lesson, humility. I'll say, there was a story that I discovered in the book of Acts, Acts chapter 10. I need a volunteer to read a few verses from Acts chapter 10. And we'll fumble around with somebody on their phone or whatever. And I'll have them read, say, the story of Peter when he had the vision. Peter had the vision, and, the net was let down. He said, I don't eat unclean stuff. And you know how the vision goes on if you read Acts chapter 10. And again, at the conclusion, I would say, what does this verse teach us? Because I want them to understand the process, not because I told them, because they thought the wheels were going and they examined it. There is nothing more beautiful in a church than to see the members of the church with their Bibles open, thinking, studying discussing. There's nothing more. I don't care how great the music is. I don't care how great the sermon is. Those are all great things. But to see the members in the church with their Bibles open, it is the process of discipleship. So I said, so closing question. So there has to be a takeaway. At the end of your class, oh, I got 2 minutes. I'm going to do it. At the end of your class, what was it that you want them to take away from this week's lesson? I'm just giving you a suggestion. It may not be the direction you're going, but I want people to take away that our lives, that like the title of the lesson for this week is a blueprint for a better world. Blueprint for a better world. I would like to lead my class to say that you have a role to play in helping this to be a better world by the text we study. That God expects us to be his hands and his feet and his ears as we see people that are destitute and struggling and the least of, that our humility, remembering where God brought us from, will help drive us to the actions, which is what this quarter is all about, the actions that Jesus told that man when he told the story about the Good Samaritan. He said, go and do thou likewise. That's the challenge for all of us this week and this quarter as we study this quarter's lesson. Let's not go through this entire quarter to be the same people we were when we started. That would be a tragedy. Let's pray that our class will grow. And I'll talk about that in some oncoming weeks. Every week we'll talk about whatever the week's lesson. And I want to share some things that I would encourage every Sabbath school, small group, large group, action group to do to help us to reach some of these goals together, because we're all in this together. Listen, I want to thank all of you for joining tonight. Thank you all. Visit my website for more information. I got some great blogs. If you go to my YouTube page, there's a link on my website for some tutorials, and all of you should have a copy of my book. If you don't have a copy, you can go on my website, you can get an ebook or a hard copy, and your support of this private lay ministry was much appreciated. I'm going to be praying for your success. As you pray for mine, I'm praying for your success, that this week you can help your class to grow. Listen, I'm going to sign off now. I want to say God bless you all. Keep us all as Sabbath school teachers. We're a team. Let's all pray for each other. Let's all support each other. God bless you all and have a good night.